What do you think, bud? Should we do some podcasting? No? Ah. Hello Pickles and welcome to episode 17 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I am a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a massive hello and welcome to you. A brief word of warning, which is to say that this is a swearing friendly podcast, and therefore the language, it does get a little bit adult, as we would say. So if that's not your bag, I appreciate you giving us a try, but this is probably not going to be for you. Please do take it as fair warning in that I will be using some cursing, some colourful language throughout the rest of the podcast, and so please don't get uppity with me as and when that does occur, because I can't say I haven't warned you. I do feel this is a bit of a fool me once, fool me twice scenario, so you know, if you're still bearing on with this and you don't like the fact that I'm going to drop a few F-bombs in here, I mean, more fool you. But for those of you who've been with me for a while, whether you love it, whether you just make do with it, I am delighted to have you all back. I hope you're all incredibly well. It's been another couple of weeks over here, and a madcap couple of weeks it has been, certainly for me. I hope you've had a slightly more restful time of it. The good news is, to a certain extent, that today is a beautiful, bright, sunny day, and it's somewhere in the region of about 15 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is something that is not quite 80. I want to say it's like 60-ish, but I mean, that's witchcraft as far as I'm concerned. But it's certainly pretty warm. I've still got on the knitwear because, you know, commitment, but I've got windows open downstairs, I've got breezes coming into the house. It's quite lovely. Now, to those of you that are suffering in polar vortexes, I'm really fucking sorry, that looks miserable, and especially to those of you in Canada and the sort of northern parts of the US, that just looks horrific, and I hope you're staying safe and I hope you're all well. Don't get me wrong, I'm all in favour of a little bit of colder weather. Polar vortexes take the piss, let's be very clear on that. But in terms of kind of the 15 degrees that we have here, I'm not sure I'm totally ready to embrace it. I'm not sure I'm totally up for kind of putting all the winter woolies back into boxes and so on. I still want a little bit of winter, but at the same time, the lift in my mood today from the slightly warmer weather, from the sunny day, it is palpable. I'm grateful enough to be someone that doesn't particularly suffer from kind of seasonal affective disorder, but certainly there's something about the sunshine this weekend that has really truly kind of lifted my spirits, and so yeah, it's been a bit of a nice shift. I'm fine if it wants to get a little bit cooler again, but you know, if it sticks with this for a while, as long as we don't leap straight into like 28 degrees in April again, which is what we had last year, I'm okay with that. But look, at the risk of turning into Amy Florence of the Stranded podcast, who is, as we all know, our beloved weatherer-in-chief from a UK perspective, just to say, yeah, it's pretty sunny here and I'm pretty chirpy about it. In terms of the next few weekends, I've mentioned in a previous episode that I will be heading to Unravel next weekend. Unravel is a yarn festival that takes place in Farnham in Surrey, which is not too far outside of London. It's a festival that I've been happy enough to attend for the last few years, and I'm looking forward to going back. So I will be there on Saturday, that's Saturday the 23rd of February, and so if you are there, if you're around, please do feel free to stop me to say hello. We've established in previous episodes that I'm pretty kind of forthcoming and happy to chat to you as you go, so please do not feel intimidated in the slightest. There is very little about me that is intimidating, although if you do catch me on the tube pre like 7:30 in the morning and I haven't had coffee, my resting bitch face is enough to give you some seriously significant doubts about that. But in terms of a yarn festival, mentally I'm pretty good and prepped and ready to go, and I will almost certainly have had coffee. I'm going to be heading over there with a wonderful friend of mine from the podcasting community, who is Hannah, who has the Corner of Craft podcast. She is also the purveyor of some of the most beautiful, wonderful little progress keepers that I show on some of the projects that I have, as well as being a fabulous yarn dyer too. So I'm looking forward to catching up with her and doing a few rounds of the festival itself. But if you do see us, please feel free to stop us and say hello. It would be delightful. And then not too far after that, into the month of March, is of course EYF. And EYF, despite only having been once before, which was last year, it has a very special place in my heart, not least because Edinburgh is my hometown. And so I'm delighted to once again be heading back there, not only to be back in the burg, as we would say, but also to get a chance to see more of you and say hello in person. Last year it was such a fantastic experience. There is a wonderful mix of dyers both from the UK and from further afield, and so it's a great chance to go and squish and sample some beautiful wares there. It's also a fantastic opportunity to say hello to knitters who've come not only from the UK but from far wider afield. And so if you are going to be there, please do stop me and say hello. Now, I've been organised enough to manage to get sort of tickets and stuff when I was there, but what I haven't done is bought any of the tickets for the events that are in the evenings. Part of that is to just kind of keep my my calendar, keep my options a little bit open, so depending on how I'm feeling, if I'm shattered, I can go and stare at a wall somewhere. If I'm feeling a bit more upbeat, I can perhaps arrange to meet with some folk. I know that I'm looking to meet up with both some knitting friends and some non-knitting friends as well while I'm up there, and so yes, I will be predominantly at the festival during the day, so feel free to say hi if you should happen to see me there. I will be letting you know what sweaters and stuff I'm going to be wearing a bit closer to the time, partly because it makes me slightly easier to spot in a crowd, but yeah, at the moment, no idea, not a clue, so we shall see how that goes. In terms of other bits and pieces, a massive thank you once again to everyone who took part in the Blame Dunderknit Along. We covered that off in the previous episode and prizes were awarded to 3 individuals. All 3 have got in touch with me. All 3 of those packages have now been shipped and should be making their way to you in the hopefully not too distant future. And so thank you once again for that. Now, as I've mentioned before, the Blame Dunderknit Along, it is not completely gone, it is merely resting. So when it comes to a point when I think I'm going to be able to shoulder more of that responsibility for all of your wild abandoned cast-ons that are out there, I will certainly be doing the same. So fear not, it will be making a return. I just need to you know, take a minute and just, you know, steady myself once more for that incredible burn of responsibility that comes my way. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. But all that said, let's get into the podcast proper. As ever, you'll find links and listings for all the things I cover in this week's episode, both in the description box down below, as well as over on our Ravelry group. We have a Ravelry group. It is the Knitting Vicariously podcast group. If you search for Knitting Vicariously in the groups tab on Ravelry, you should find us there. And as ever, I post a new episode thread for each and every episode that goes up, with links to all of the different topics I mentioned there. You'll also be able to find show notes over on Instagram by following the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account. This is an Instagram account that's linked specifically to the podcast, where I include names of makers and hashtags that are relevant to what I've discussed there, which makes it hopefully just a little bit easier for you to commence with some light stalking activities, which, let's face it, is a large part of what Instagram is there for. So I hope that helps. But without any further ado, let me show off a little bit of what it is that I'm wearing, and we'll get to this in a minute because I am wearing and indeed repping one of my favourite podcasts out there, but I also happen to still be wearing some knitwear, and so let me tell you a little bit more about what I'm wearing, because this is my Campsite Cardigan. Yes, I will stand up and give you a proper look at it. I'm conscious it's quite difficult to see it when I happen to be sat down, but this is the Campsite Cardigan. It is a pattern by Alicia Plummer. I'm going to put the picture of it that she has on the design page up here on the screen, so you can take a look. You may well have spotted it. It is a pattern that has been very, very thoroughly knit over the times, and I'll stand up and give you a little tour. But just before we get into the tour itself, I can't go any further without saying, ologies boobies! Yeah. I've talked about this podcast in the past. I think I mentioned it first over on episode 4. Hi, big face. And yeah, I'll be talking about it more in a second. So the ologies boobies, they're definitely there. We'll come back to them. But first up, Campsite Cardigan. So there you have the Campsite Cardigan. You will see that it is a raglan cardigan, so you've got the raglan increases here on either side. It has fairly sort of shallow shoulders here and a very narrow panel here at the front, which is great for an open cardigan, although it's not perhaps the best at staying on my shoulders. I'll come on to that in a few minutes, but we do have, as you'll see, this beautiful kind of eyelet patterning here, and it becomes more frequent as you get down the body of the cardigan itself. The cardigan, for me, it sits and falls just, I want to say, just by my fingertips, and I'm conscious that standing here on the screen, that is not necessarily a helpful descriptor, but if I go up on tiptoes, can you just about see? Not quite. It stops just roughly where my fingertips stop if I stand with my hands by my sides. So you will see, as I say, if I pull it up a little bit, you've got this ever increasing lace eyelet pattern from a little bit less frequent up here in the top, gradually getting more and more frequent. Down towards the bottom there is then a ribbed collar that is picked up and knit the whole way around in 2x2 rib with a nice stretchy cast off, which is great. Full length sleeves, as you can see, and if I just finish off by giving you a quick twirl, spinny thing, there you have the back. So yeah, there you have it. Let me sit down and I'll tell you a bit more. Apologies too for my creaky floorboards. As soon as I start moving around on them, I hear them creaking and I don't realise how loud they sound until I listen back to this. So apologies for that, but Victorian houses in London, what can you do? So yes, this is my Campsite cardigan. I knit this back in, I want to say 2015, let me just double check that. 2016. January 2016, so I knit this just over 3 years ago. It is a pattern by Alicia Plummer, as I've mentioned. I haven't really knit very many cardigans. I think I've only finished 2 cardigans, and I have a third one on the needles, but it's been on the needles for a very, very long time. Ooh, hang on. No, I've got 2 more on the needles, but they've been on the needles even longer, to the point where they're not front of mind, so they barely count. But yeah, I think I've got 3 cardigans on the needles. Maybe more. Anyway, certainly one that I have at least an intention of finishing in the future-ish period of time thing. And that's my Ronan cardigan, which I started, I want to say, about 18 months ago, and got through pretty much all of the body, got onto the sleeve, and it's been sitting ever since. But having watched Amy Florence struggle to get through the sleeves and the brioche rib on her Ronan cardigan, I think it's probably fair to say that my enthusiasm for it has maybe taken a little bit of a backseat. Because I appreciate that for Amy those sleeves were a slog, and after the sleeves comes the collar, which is also brioche knit. Anyway, I'm not talking about Ronan. Put Ronan out of your minds for a second. Let's focus on the Campsite cardigan, because yeah, this is a pattern, as I mentioned, by Alicia Plummer. It is a paid for pattern. I had also knit the Campsite Shawl, which I've spoken about here previously, which again has a similar kind of eyelet pattern on it that gets more and more frequent as the pattern extends towards the edges. And yeah, it's a really simple knit. It is a raglan style cardigan, and it does have this incredibly kind of narrow section at the front when you start to increase for the raglan on the front side. And what that means is, again, it's great in that it sits off kind of either side of the boobs at the front, which is lovely. It's not the coziest of cardigans. It's quite kind of, you've got to really you know, kind of wriggle with it a bit and pull it right all the way up onto your shoulders if you then want to kind of cross it over and be super cozy in that sense. It's very much a hanging open cardigan rather than a snuggly up sort of cardigan, which I think is probably why I looked at Ronan as being an alternative, because that's a big snuggly. But again, not talking about Ronan, talking about this. So but yeah, it's really, really, do you know what? This is probably my most worn knit around the house. I very, very rarely wear this cardigan outside. I very rarely wear cardigans generally, I would say. But in terms of having something to chuck on and wander around the house, particularly on days like this, where it is, you know, kind of a little bit cool, but for the most part quite temperate, this is a great pattern just to throw on. It does have its issues, so again, because of this narrow band here, it does tend to slide off the shoulders a little bit. It doesn't kind of stay quite as fast as I would like it to. But it's a really, really simple knit, and again, it is just the increases that you have for the raglan itself. It's then just knit straight, and at some point you start doing some of the lace charts, and yeah, I think in terms of the pattern itself, it's a fairly straightforward one. The size I knit was the size 43, and my chest is a little bit bigger than that at the moment. My chest is probably closer to 45, 46. Not bragging, just the way it is. But it's definitely, again, because it's open front, there's quite a lot of kind of forgiving nature that comes with that, and also wool equals a bit stretchy. So so yeah, that's all good. The yarn I used for this sweater is Madelinetosh DK Twist in the Dr. Zhivago Sky colourway, which is this blue-grey. I alternated skeins on the body of the sweater itself, but then just used single skein on the sleeves and on the collar, which is kind of my default way of doing things. If I'm feeling particularly nervous as to how it's going to work up, I will probably look at alternating on the sleeves as well. But this one, you know, I think it paid off in the sense that it's all fairly kind of uniform with the colour, which is always good. And just on the subject of Madelinetosh, following on from the previous episode where I spoke a little about my feelings about Madelinetosh at the moment, following on from the discussion that we've been having around racism and diversity in the yarny community, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who reached out with your thoughts. Again, as I mentioned previously, this is not my intention to start a boycott or in any way to encourage others to do something similar. It's very much just making clear my own feelings, my own personal convictions around it, partly on the basis of the fact that I have a lot of their yarn in my stash already, and partly on the basis that I am talking to you about it, and so I wouldn't feel comfortable in myself continuing to talk about them in quite the same manner as I had done previously, and that still stands for this week. So when it comes to talking about the yarn that I've used here for the Campsite cardigan, yes, I used Madelinetosh DK Twist, and you know, it is a superwash merino. It is pretty close to what the original pattern recommends, and it held up really well in that regard. But there are also some wonderful other yarns that folks have used to knit this exact pattern, and I'd highly recommend you hopping over to the pattern page and taking a look at some of those options too. So they include some of the Julie Yaslin colours, which are bases which are beautiful. There's a few folk who've knit it out of Knit Picks yarns, and they have some fantastic options as well. There are some folk who knit this out of Miss Babs Yowza, for instance, which is a great staple, as well as Magpie Fibres if you want something that's a little bit swankier and got a little bit of a cashmere base in there too. So please do feel free to hop on over and take a look at some of the other projects out there, and yeah, have a bit of a think about if you want to knit something similar, what you might use to do just that. But yeah, so knit using merino superwash wool. It's about 250 yards to a skein, and this cardigan took me a little bit over 5 skeins to knit. So given it is quite long, and it did definitely stretch when I blocked this afterwards, this is probably the garment that has stretched the most, and a large part of that is not only that it's a cardigan, and obviously it's knit seamlessly, so there are no stabilizing seams to stop it from just stretching, but also the gauge that it's knit at. So I think I knit the majority of this on a 4.5mm needle, which is a US size 7. Let me double check that. No, I'm talking rubbish. I knit the majority of this on a 5mm needle, which is a US size 8, and that goes a long way towards explaining exactly why, one, this stretched quite significantly with blocking, to the point where this, I think, is the first knit I've ever been brave enough to put inside a tumble dryer and just kind of see, checking intermittently, as it shrunk back, as it shrunk back, as it shrunk back. You know, you don't want to get out something that's basically, you know, going to be a tiny little shrug or bolero to cover the boob region. But as it was, it worked out fine. I checked on it every kind of 10 minutes or so, and it had eventually got to the point where it had shrunk roughly back to the size it was when I bound it off, which was a good thing. But also I do think that the gauge that I knit this at, it also means that it's pilled a little bit more. So again, one thing that you do see with yarns of pretty much any type is that the tighter gauge that you knit them at, the less likely they are to pill. And that's mostly because if there's sort of a very dense knit, then in terms of the friction fibres that are in there, they don't necessarily have quite as much room to move around and to pill and essentially kind of create these little bits of fluff and bubbling. Whereas knit at a looser gauge, you'll find that any yarns with a kind of propensity to pill are more likely to do so. So I've certainly got a fair bit of pilling with this, but then as I've mentioned, I have worn this quite a lot over the years, chucking it on and wandering around the house, so I was never expecting this to be in completely pristine condition. But fair enough, a few sort of passes with a depiller or a gleaner is enough to sort of send it back into relatively good stead again, which again, superwash merino is wont to do that, so you should be fine. But yes, this is my Campsite cardigan. As I say, I would seriously consider knitting other cardigans as well. I think it is just, it's the purling, it's the long rows of purling, and it takes quite a lot for me to be in a mentality where I'm like, I'm going to do something that's got a lot of purling in it. It's not so much that I mind actually doing it, it's more just being in the right frame of mind to embrace it and just get on with it. So yeah, I would definitely consider knitting other cardigan patterns. I don't wear them quite so often as my pullovers, but at the same time, you know, the fact that I've worn this quite so much is probably testament to the fact that I could do with at least one more in my wardrobe. That one more could well be Ronan. I just need to pull my finger out and well, I say pull my finger out, I might as well just pull it's in here. That's my Ronan cardigan there. It's gold because of course it is. And on top of that is my Harrisville tweed that I've shown you previously. So yes, anyway, don't pay too much attention to what's behind the curtain because it's full. Anyway, so yes, this is my Campsite cardigan. I will consider knitting other cardigans as they arise, but for now, this is a great throw on and wander about sort of knit. And before I finish up with the what I'm wearing section, it would be remiss of me to not mention ologies in a little bit more detail. So as I touched on before, I have shared my love for this podcast on previous episodes, but if you haven't watched those or if you've been living under a rock, then allow me just to take 1 minute to wax a little bit lyrical about Ologies. Ologies is a fabulous audio podcast. It's not directly knitting related, however, if you enjoy essentially badass women, a little bit of sweary commentary and lots of kind of anecdotal and slightly offbeat topic asides, you will adore this podcast. So it is set up and hosted by a fabulous woman called Ali Ward. She's based in the US. She is a science communicator and comedian and spends a huge amount of time going and interviewing fantastically interesting people about the ologies that they study, from everything from the subject of marriage, which is on one quite recently, to personality profiling and psychology, through to fearology, which is one of my favourite, or rather two of my favourite episodes. There are episodes on cats and dogs and bugs and trees and just about anything that you can think of, and it is a wonderful podcast. I say this as someone who has been listening to it since the very first episode first aired, so I can definitely attest to being a bit of a fangirl about it. I support it on Patreon. It is a wonderful endeavour, and I think particularly as someone who has a kind of a sideline interest in science. It's never going to be kind of, you know, my absolute passion in life, but I love learning and I love finding out more about things that perhaps I'm not immediately surrounded by or kind of entrenched in my day-to-day. And Ali does that in a way that is incredibly passionate and funny and articulate and really, really genuinely very accessible. And there is certainly, from my perspective, something truly wonderful about listening to, not exclusively, but largely, a very kind of female take on sciences and new technology and ways of changing essentially things that are on the planet today as they are. So yeah, if that sounds like it floats your boat, absolutely, please do check out Ologies. Moving along then, unfortunately, once again, there are no foes to show you. I have no finished objects to share this week. And in fact, even when it comes to whips, I've got a very limited amount to share. So the last couple of weeks have been very full on. Those of you who've been watching for a little while will know that I started a new job at the start of this year, and it's been a learning curve, a steepled learning curve, so to say. But the last few weeks have been particularly challenging, mostly because, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when I started, I'm one of a few that are joining the team at the moment. There is a chap who's joining the team again at the end of this month, but unfortunately in the interim, part of what's needed to be done it is both kind of what will be my job going forward and what is probably going to be more of his job going forward. And so I mean, a long story short, I've basically been doing 2 jobs since I started, which when you're trying to work out how the hell a new company works is a lot and challenging. Don't get me wrong, I'm really genuinely enjoying it. They're a fantastic group of people to work with, and it's not knitting related at all. It's very much my other kind of passion and sideline, which is around consumer technology, but it's just taken a lot of my brain space. And so coming back in the evening, sitting down and getting ready to sit and knit for a while, particularly when I talk to you about one of the projects I've been working on, has been a challenge. And so I've got a little bit of a fail to share with you, as well as a whip that I picked up in my hour of need. And so let me take you through those just now. So the first whip that I'm going to be sharing with you is once again in this fabulous bag that I was made by the wonderful Margaret, who's Sewing Ruby on Instagram. She is a fabulous friend of mine from my local knit group, and this was my Christmas swap present, and it is beautiful. It's Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter, and she made this for me, and I am still completely in love with it, so thank you for that, Margaret. But living inside it is a pattern that I had only just cast on last time we spoke, and that is Donburi, and I will put a picture of it up here on the screen so you can take a quick look at it here. And it's a beautiful sweater. It really, really is a beautiful sweater, and I cast it on using some yarn that I picked up at Rhinebeck, which is some beautiful Polworth silk yarn in this fabulous forest green colourway. It's yarn by Souza, and I have been doing a little bit more knitting on it. However, there's a reason that I haven't been picking this up as much as I would really have liked to, and that reason may become apparent when I show you a little bit more of what's going on here. So you will have seen from the designer picture that I showed that there is this fabulous texture, like little kind of acorns around the yoke itself. The challenge that I have is that I don't think it's showing up well enough in this yarn. I'll hold it up so you can see and judge for yourselves to a certain extent, but if I pop it up here, it's not super easy to see. So actually the lighting that we have here, given that I've got some fairly significant kind of floor lights in front of me on either side, mean that you can see this kind of okay-ish. But I do think the kind of variegation that we have within the yarn and the texture of the stitches themselves, it's just not quite right. And so I would infinitely rather get to a point where where I say, look, I'm going to stop now before it's too late, and seriously reconsider and seriously think about if this is something that I want to continue with, or if I just want to cut and run. And at the moment, my instincts are telling me to cut and to run. Not to say that I don't love the yarn, I adore the yarn. Not to say I don't love the pattern, I adore the pattern. But I just think perhaps the two of them together are not going to kind of essentially make me happy. And so I do think that when you are reluctant to work on something you've been really excited about, and just you sit down and it kind of, the energy sort of flows away from you a little bit and you feel it kind of sapping yourself, it's not a great sign. And I will say with this that I was working on it, or when I was sort of thinking I should probably go and work on it, it was just that feeling of like, oh, I need to go and work on it now. And that for me is never a great indication. So I think I'm going to be ripping this back. I'm going to be putting the yarn back into my stash. I am again still desperate to want to knit something with this yarn. In fact, this yarn would make a really great cardigan because it's got that bit of silk to it. It would have a lovely drape to it. That might be something that I consider. But certainly in terms of the textured yoke, I just think the variegation in this yarn is making it a little bit too difficult to see. So unfortunately, I won't be progressing any further with this project, but it is a beautiful one and the pattern is really lovely. I was working through it, it was going really well, but yeah, it's not quite the right combination of the two. And I would just say, look, it's a lot of people have said some very, very nice things about me and the sweaters that I knit all over the place, and I'm very grateful for that. But I do also just want to make it very, very clear that there can be all this kind of pressure that comes with seeing podcasters or seeing people on Instagram who seem to get it right with everything that they choose, and you know, oh, it looks great, and you know, these are just colours that were plucked from my stash or that I bought online with never having seen them before. And look, sometimes we fuck up and we get it wrong as well. There's nothing, you know, kind of magical or experienced about it. I'm someone who's been knitting now for the best part of 9 or 10 years, and I was super excited about this combination, cast it on, and it didn't really work. And yes, I probably could have figured that out if I'd swatched. I'm not going into that debate. You all know how I feel about swatching. It's not a thing that I do. But yeah, I will say that just look, I still want to knit this pattern, I still want to use this yarn, I just don't think they work together. And so yeah, it's going to be ripped out and it will turn into something new. And I don't know, I'll have a little hunt in my stash to see if I've got other options for Donburi that I think is going to make a sweater that I really, really enjoy. I know that I was feeling particularly drawn to this colour, but you know, we'll see. There are always going to be other options. So yeah, not quite a sweater just yet. So feeling a little bit disheartened as I was by Donburi, and not being able to take that forward in quite the way that I would have liked, I decided that I would have a little sit back, I'd have a little reflect as to what it was I wanted to pick up. And it's kind of shocking to me that this is what I opted for. So I have been on a sweater kick for quite a long time now. I love knitting sweaters. They're one of my favourite things, if not my favourite thing to knit overall. And in recent months I've really kind of been feeling that and been sort of catching myself saying, oh, you know, I've got all these sort of skeins of yarn that I've put aside for shawls, but I'm just not feeling very shawly, and I'm not feeling very like accessories and scarfy. Hats, fine. Hats are great travel knitting. I can, you know, kind of sit and work on those during my commute, but you know, everything else, oh, I don't know how I feel. So the fact that I picked up a scarf is interesting, but it wasn't just any scarf in my defense. So this is a scarf that I cast on about 18 months ago, and it has lain pretty dormant for quite a long time now. So it's going to take me a little while to get it out and uncurl it all, but let me show you the designer picture so you can see it. This is my starting point wrap, and it's a pattern by Joji Locatelli. It is a wonderful, it was originally released as a mystery knit along, so where she released clues incrementally as she went along. I did not knit this as part of the mystery cal, I picked this up afterwards. I'm not very good at mystery knit alongs. I quite like to see and know that the finished object is one that I really want. Otherwise, I do a lot of second guessing and I'm not totally sure about it. But yeah, this one, once I'd seen it kind of finished and launched and released and out in the wild, I really liked it. I am, as you can see, someone who has quite a few single skeins of yarn in her stash, albeit most of them are actually further up higher than you can see in the frame here. But I did take great delight in picking out 5 yarns that I thought kind of complemented each other nicely, and it's a little bit different from what you might be expecting from me, so let me get out what I've got and I'll show you. So obviously I'm not someone who shies away from colour. I mean, I feel like my backdrop gives you a pretty strong indication of that, but I do also love a neutral, as you'll be able to see from my cardigan, and so it may not be too much of a surprise to you to know that that's kind of the route I went down with the starting point. So if I hold up here, you'll be able to see, so this is one half, or rather sort of one partially completed section of the starting point wrap. For those of you that aren't aware, the way that this is constructed is you start all the way over here with your little kind of shawl like triangle. You increase out to the point where you get to the edges here, and then you knit with increases and decreases to ensure that the width of the shawl or scarf then stays the same as you go along. And there are these panels, if I hold it up, that you can see. It's got a lovely mixture of textures. It has some garter stitch, it has some twisted rib, and it's got some lace here towards the end. But the idea is that you knit 2 of these sections, which are the side edges all the way into the points in the center, as you can see. So one like this and then the other one like this, and that's the one I'll show you in a second. And then you pick up here for the V and then decrease up to the top, and then similarly pick up and decrease down to the bottom. Hopefully that makes sense. But yes, let me show you the section that I'm working on, which is here. So yeah, I picked this up this week, and I think largely it was because I was feeling the need for a little bit of garter stitching, and so I actually picked it up when it was around about, I think about here. So I've done a little bit of work on it this week, not a huge amount, but still, and picked it up and knit some of the garter ridges. There are a few of these eyelet lace rows as well that you can see in the paler colour. But I really, really like the way that this is working up, and I do love a sort of neutral collection of neutral scarf. Let me run you through the yarns very quickly because I will show you what those are. So there are 5 yarns that I'm working with here. They're all single ply. The first of them is this, which is Hedgehog Fibres in the Teacup colourway, which you'll be able to see is just a very kind of delicate cream. It's got a few speckles of pink and of darker kind of greyish brown in there too. And it's a really, really pretty, very delicate little colourway. And that, I believe, is my colour number 1. I'm never going to remember what colours are which. I might remember, we'll see, we'll see. Next up we have this beautiful, beautiful yarn here, and if I hold it here you'll see, as and when the camera decides to focus, there we go. So this is, again, it's a sort of neutral base, but this one is a slight more sort of blush pink than cream, and there are a bunch of different coloured speckles in there. So you'll see there are some pinks, there are some blues, there are some lovely yellowy ochres as well. This is also a single ply. This is Woolen Boon on the skinny base, and it is in her Buffy colourway, and honestly it is one of my absolute favourites. If I pop it up here you'll be able to see some of the, look at the speckles. They're so pretty. And of course I've got my hair on it because I have my hair on everything in this house. But yeah, that is Buffy, which is such a pretty colourway. Then next up we have this beautifulness here, and this is a sort of a I want to say more of a kind of taupey beigey base with some lovely kind of browns and ochres and some blues in there and a few speckles of red too. And this is from the wonderful Kristen of Voolenvine. This is her Nouveau base and it's her I Am No Bird colourway. This is a fabulous colourway of Kristen's that obviously references Jane Eyre, and it's one that I have on I think I have a couple of skeins of this, and I will say it's one of Kristen's colours that it does vary from base to base, or from dye lot to dye lot rather. Now obviously you'd expect that because hand dyed yarns and so on. I've had versions of this that are slightly more kind of lavender in colour. I've got this one which is more kind of taupey, and I purposefully chose this one on the basis that it worked kind of really nicely and cohesively with some of the others that I have. I love the kind of variety that comes with some of these hand dyed colours, particularly when you've been following a hand dyer for a period of time and you can see, you know, if you kind of hold them up and be like for like, that there are some differences there. I find that really, really appealing. It makes it a little bit difficult if you want to knit those things together, which is always why hand dyers say if you want to use them together in a project, please buy them all at the same time. It makes life much easier. But certainly for this, I love this colourway an awful, awful lot. Next up is this, which is Court and Spark, and this is on Madelinetosh Merino Light. It is a mix of silvers and kind of cool bronzy gold tones. Court and Spark is a colourway that I have on a couple of bases. I don't think it's been around for quite some time, to be honest. So when I bought it originally, it's Madelinetosh, where they tend to do colourways that don't always kind of stretch beyond a few months at a time. So I'm not sure this is a colourway that is available anymore, but certainly it's a lovely kind of neutrally taupey gold colour. And then last but not least, I have another Hedgehog Fibres on their singles base, and this is the Concrete colourway. And there you have it. So this is more of a kind of standard, quite a flat grey, but with some little sort of tones and speckles of rust in there too. It's not too variegated, it is quite a flat tonal grey, but yeah, just with those little kind of pops of orangey brown rust in there just to keep it interesting. And my hair is on everything. Oh, it's that time of year. But yes, so those are the 5 colours that I'm using. You can see them throughout the shawl itself. So if I hold this here, you'll be able to see, so we've got Teacup starting here, we then move into a little bit of Court and Spark, and then we've got some Buffy, the Concretes and Buffy, I Am No Bird, back to Teacup, Court and Spark, Buffy, Concrete, Buffy, and then the white, or rather the sort of palest neutral sections here are all Teacup, with the others kind of interspersed as I go. So the next thing I'm going to be working on is a little section of Twisted Rib, which you can see in the other half that I've already done, which is this way round. So we've got a Twisted Rib section here, and then there's some lace in the I Am No Bird, and then a little bit more eyelet lace in the Concrete before I join them together. So I've actually really been enjoying working on this. It's just enough to hold my attention, because I'm coming home at the end of a long day and just wanting to kind of sit and decompress on the nights when I'm back. It's perfect for that, and it means that I can get through a section and feel as though I'm achieving something without necessarily requiring quite so much brain power. And so even with the sort of more textured sections coming up, they're all fairly straightforward and easy to follow. So yeah, I think it's doing me good at the moment. It's a nice, relaxing kind of achievable project, if you like, which is very much what my brain space needs right now. Ah dear, it's yeah, it's been a challenge. So yes, moving along into vicarious knitting, and while my knitting mojo has been perhaps a little bit schlumpy in the last couple of weeks, my yarn purchasing mojo appears to be doing just fine. I will say that I had been on the lookout to find some new dyers to support and purchase some yarn from, particularly off the back of the recent discussions around racism and diversity. And there was one brand that kept coming to the fore. It's a brand that I've known about for a really long time. It's a brand that I got to squish in person when I was over at Rhinebeck, and why I didn't purchase yarn there and then still escapes me to this day. I think by the time I was able to actually get into this booth and squish and kind of wander around freely, I was a little bit snowblind is probably the only excuse that I have. So this was around about, I think it was roughly lunchtime on the Sunday on day 2 at Rhinebeck, and I think by that point I was just doing a lot of like blinking and staring and squishing, and so I think maybe a little bit overstimulated by the time I got to this booth. But I am absolutely delighted to have had an opportunity now to purchase and talk to you about this amazingness. Look at the colour of this, isn't it stunning? So purpley blue is not generally a yarn that I've got much of over here. I've got a few kind of like denim-y blues, but nothing that is really quite this incredibly vibrant, and I'm so excited about it. I love this colour. I absolutely adore it. So this is Neighbourhood Fibre Company. It's her studio worsted base. It is the Georgetown colourway, and let me hold it up to the camera so you can see and appreciate it in all of its glory. There we go. So the camera is making it a little bit lighter than it would appear, but it is this stunningly beautiful purpley royal blue punch in the face, absolutely beautiful colorway. And there is a little bit of tonality and kind of variegation to it. You can just see here that there's a little bit more kind of slight variegation in the blue versus the bluey purple, but it is absolutely perfect. So 4 skeins of these. This is, as mentioned, it's our studio worsted base. It is 100% superwash merino, but it is so soft and squishy. I'd swear blind there was cashmere in this. It's delightful. But yes, 400 yards, 2 and 8 ounce skein, and it is definitely a worsted weight. So 4.5 or 5 stitches to an inch, and oh, it's beautiful. I'm so in love with this colour. I have been looking for kind of my perfect, what I affectionately call blurple, which is the perfect kind of bluey purple colourway, and I think this is definitely it. It is obnoxious, it is bright, it's kind of in my wheelhouse, right? But but yeah, it's so stunning. And yeah, I've no idea why I didn't purchase her yarn when I was over at Rhinebeck. I have been kicking myself ever since, particularly now that Amy's been knitting her Stonewall pullover. Less said about that the better, but in this beautiful beautiful yarn. So she's been using the studio worsted base as well, and I saw her starting to knit that up, and I just thought, right, I've wanted this yarn for ages, I need to bite the bullet. And these skeins, just to kind of further emphasize the need for purchasing them, these were actually discounted. So these, all 4 of these are knotted skeins, so I may come across a couple of knots in the skeins themselves. I'm not too fussy about that, whether it is a case of kind of untying the knot and then weaving the ends in later, whether it's a case of kind of working around it depending on where it comes in a row. I'm perfectly happy to do that. They were slightly discounted, so I thought I would you know, take the advantage and offset some of the customs fees, because yes, I do get stung by customs. Yes, that sucks. I would be infinitely happier if I knew it was going to the folk in the delivery office, who are just stars and legends, all of them. As it is, it goes into a black hole and the government take it, but there you have it. So yes, really, really in love with these. And I did get one other skein just for science, because as is my wont, and it is this beautiful, beautiful, it's not quite as kind of wild fuchsia as is coming across the screen here. It is a very kind of punchy, bright burgundy is probably the colour that I would call it. Let me just see if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. So this is the Charles Village colorway, and this is actually their Studio DK. So this is a DK weight yarn. It is 275 yards, also of superwash merino. And yeah, just a really, really lovely, slightly tonal, bright burgundy, I would call it. But yeah, amazing, amazing colours. If you haven't already checked out Neighbourhood Fibre Company, I would highly recommend that you do so. Just the bases that they have, the colourways that they have, they are such fabulous variety, and I'm really looking forward to knitting these up. I do think these might end up being a new kind of go-to for me as far as kind of jumpers and just kind of sweater knits go, because they're so deliciously soft and I love the colour so much. So yeah, there you have it. In terms of what I'm going to knit, I mean, who knows? 1600 yards that I've got between those four skeins, so I've certainly got the yardage to do a fair few things. Again, in terms of the colour, this could be a new Donburi. I'm not totally sure yet. I will need to have a bit more of a think, but as it is, you know this, I've told you this before, I tend to buy yarns that I really like and buy enough yardage that gives me flexibility, because the best laid plans of mice and men aft gang agley, as the dear Robert Burns would have said. In terms of other Vicarious knits, there are a couple of patterns that have caught my eye recently, but they're all quite simple and straightforward. Now, I don't quite know if this is a reflection of my mindset, which is my suspicion, in that I'm calling out for kind of just simple, help me knit something that's really straightforward, because that's the brain space that I have available, or if it's a kind of aesthetic thing and I'm really kind of calling out for simple patterns where I can do some fun things with the yarn and maybe have a look at that. But all of the patterns that I'm going to run you through are kind of really classic, simple, straightforward shapes, and just leave a bit of room for flexibility. So the first of those is a pattern called Brick. It's by Claire Lee, and it is a very simple and straightforward and quite elegant raglan sweater. And it's got a slight, I'm not sure I'd go so far as to call it a scoop neck. It's more of a kind of lower crew neck, but it's a raglan sweater. It's got some shaping in and around the sort of waist and onto the hips, and it's not, I don't think it's cropped, but it certainly sits a little bit higher than some sweaters, and it just looks like it would be such a great staple. So yeah, that one certainly caught my eye. Another that caught my eye, and this is partly thank you to, I think it's Hazy Summers in the Show Us Your February Vicarious Knits threads. She had called out a pattern by Truly Myrtle, which is called Tui, and I'll put a picture of it up here. That's a really lovely shape as well. Very different. It's a little bit more kind of boxy in its style. It has the kind of slight kind of drop shoulder shape that I really, really love in store-bought sweaters. I love drop shoulder shaped sweaters. They fit really nicely with my body shape, and they're quite nice and flowy as well, which is no bad thing at all. But yeah, so Tui is a really lovely example. I'm pretty sure it's fingering weight though, which is the only thing that's throwing me off it. Just because fingering weight with that much knitting, it would be a little bit sloggy, but it is a beautiful, beautiful sweater, and I really do like that. And then the other one that, I mean, this has been in my head for such a long time, and I feel like I just need to get it out and make it happen. And this is the Contrast Sweater by Petite Knit, for reasons that are going to be apparent, right? I mean, the colour scheme nails my personal aesthetic from the design picture. It is a really simple, straightforward shape. It has some beautiful, it's actually really interestingly constructed. It's a contiguous construction, which means that there's some really interesting stuff that goes on with the neck and the shoulder shaping at the top, with some short rows, so that you are going to be kind of doing it all in one, but not necessarily kind of knitting front and then back and shoulders and all of that. It's a really interesting construction that I've yet to kind of really do in a pattern and get my head around, and so that could be a really interesting option. And I'd knit it in pretty much exactly those colours as well. So I think having a finished object that, or rather having a pattern picture that looks fairly similar to how I imagine a finished object in my mind, certainly helps my attention span at this point in time. And And as well, I believe that was a pattern that I think it's Isabel Rose C had called out over on Ravelry in the February Vicarious Knits thread. And so yes, very similar wavelength. I see what we're doing here. But no, it's a pattern that I've loved for a very long time, and seeing it again has definitely brought it a little bit more front of mind. So I might be doing a little bit of stash diving at some point and seeing if I can make that one happen, because I like it a lot. I do actually have, to that point, so the contrast sweater, again, similar to the No Frills pattern, which is by the same designer, offers you the chance to hold a sock yarn together with a mohair or something, just to give it a little bit more kind of floof and texture. And in fact, funnily enough, a couple of months ago, I picked up some of this beautiful yarn. This is yarn by Skein Queen, who is a dyer over here in the UK. That's her logo there, and this is her Cloud Gazer base. This is actually not mohair at all. This is 74% baby Suri alpaca and 28% mulberry silk. And because it's Suri alpaca as opposed to mohair, I do believe that anyone who's got any issues with mohair, where it gives them a little bit of a scratch, or as my wonderful friend Stacy of the Stress Knits podcast called it repeatedly in her episode, I think a couple of episodes back now, she talked a lot about the prick factor. Now, this is partly it's a British English thing, and partly it's just my childish sense of humour. But the prick factor, to me, every time she said it, and she did say it quite a few times, it made me full on like snort laugh, because I mean, I don't think it's uncommon. I think you see it in the US as well, but to my mind here, prick is what we call someone who's being a bit of a douchebag, right? It's someone's a prick, you're a bit of a dick, you're a bit of an idiot. And genuinely, she kept saying it, and it got to the point where I thought, if I ever decide to launch a dating app, that is what I'm going to call it. Because to me, it's the X factor, it's the prick factor, it's all in one. Well, basically, come on, try and not be a dick, and then let's think about maybe dating. Oh dear, I don't know what made it creep into my mind, but every time she said it, I couldn't help myself. So yeah, the good news is that this yarn, similar to Stacy's wonderful bases, has none of the prick factor, which I think is what a lot of us are definitely looking for in our lives. Oh, it made me chuckle. So yeah, this is, I mean, the word soft doesn't do justice to what this is. This is genuinely, it's, you know, if you've ever had a kitten and rubbed it on your face, this is pretty much up there with that. And so this I could certainly see using for the lower portion of the contrast sweater, and I'm sure that I could find some greys for the upper section as well, and just hold this together with a yellow, probably one of the many yellows that are sitting in that cubbyhole over there. And so yeah, contrast sweater may well be in my not too distant future, prick factor notwithstanding. I can't get over it. I'm so sorry. Stacey, please know that I'm laughing with you and not at you, but I nearly died. It was oh, tremendous. In addition to the contrast sweater, I have also been considering another potential no frills sweater. Yes, I know I've still got one on the needles. I still need to rip it back a little bit and start alternating the skeins. I will do that at some point, but today is not that day. But I have some other yarn that I purchased, gosh, a fair old while ago now, and I'd earmarked it back then and have been considering picking it up more recently. So this is some Drops Air. Drops is a commercial yarn brand that we have over here in Europe, I believe. So it's part of the Garn Studio group, and this is Drops Air. Let me just double check the construction. So this is 75% alpaca, 28% polyamide and 7% wool. So it is a little bit of a mix of things, but if I hold it up, so it's a chain ply construction where there's a chained core in the center, and then sort of similar to Woolfolk Luft, it's kind of blown fibres through there, and it is this beautiful kind of again, purpley blue colour. I told you it had been in my head for a while. Now, what do we reckon? I I want to love this colour. I want to love this. I do love this colour. I want this colour to love me. And after the mint green debacle, I'm just not 100% sure. And I know for a fact that if Elena is watching this, she she is staring at me and just kind of going, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you putting yourself through this again? I want this colour to love me. I'm not sure if I want to commit to it just yet. I mean, answers on a postcard as to whether you think I can pull this off. Jewel tones, I'm good. Neutrals, fabulous. Is this erring too close on the side of pastel for me to be able to pull this off? I love it, and I'd love a no frills out of this, but I can't take another mint green debacle. So yeah, so this may end up being a no frills, or it may end up going to live with someone who can actually pull off this colour. So we shall see. Another couple of fabulous patterns that caught my eye over in the Show Us Your February Vicarious Knits thread includes a gorgeous sweater pattern called Feather. I'll put it up here on the screen. This was brought to my attention by, I'm not sure if it's Tris or Tree, in terms of how you pronounce your name, T-R-I-S, but thank you so much for posting about it. This is a beautiful yoked sweater with the design by, now let's see if I can pronounce this correctly, or even close to correctly, Sana Fjalland? Who knows? I'm very sorry if I butchered that name, but it is a beautiful yoked sweater, and definitely something that caught my eye when I was going through it. The other sweater that caught my eye, and again this fits really nicely with the kind of simplistic shape and just a little bit of interest as far as the yarn goes, is the Sisse pattern, or Sisse, which I'll put up here on the screen as well. This was brought to my attention by QWERTY88, so thank you so much for that. And this is a beautiful pattern with this fabulously kind of oversized, slightly boxy sleeve as well. By, again, apologies, I think it's German, so I might have this close to being right. I think it's by Regina Mösper. Let's run with that. So yeah, both beautiful patterns, and if you're not already following that group over there and that pattern thread in particular, I would recommend that you do so. It's such a fabulous source of inspiration, and I know that a couple of you are feeling the loss a little bit of the Blame Dunderknit along threads, so the monthly threads there are a great opportunity, place to share your inspiration and things that you really want to be working on, so please do feel free to take a look there. But yes, that's pretty much it for this podcast. A little bit light on the knitting content this time round, but I think I've got a few options now under my belt in terms of where I can invest some of that knitting energy, what little energy I've had to date, and hopefully that will be changing in the not too distant future. So to those of you who are going to be at Unravel later on this week, please do say hello. It would be lovely to chat to some of you there. I will probably try and hug you, as we've spoken about before, like hand up to say hi if you're not up for that. It's the universal language in all of this. So yeah, but it would be delightful to chat to some of you there. As ever, you can find show notes for this week's episode in the description box below, over on Ravelry, in the Knitting Vicariously podcast group, or indeed by following Knitting Vicariously as an account over on Instagram. I would love it if you continue to post your Vicarious knits both in the February Vicarious knitting thread or indeed over on Ravelry, Instagram, using the Knitting Vicariously hashtag. And so all that really remains is for me to wish you a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting keeps you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it doesn't, I invite you to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will speak to you again very soon. Bye. Okay, so I'm going to follow on with what I did last time at the end of the last episode, which was going through the Fibres challenge. Still can't pronounce it quite right. This is a challenge that's doing the rounds over on Instagram. I am just not Instagramming enough. I haven't really been on Instagram at all in the last couple of weeks, for which I really do apologise, but I haven't been on there enough to be able to share some of these, but I want to take part because fun of taking part, fear of missing out, all of those things. So I'm going to run through the prompts for the latter half of this month and just bring you up to speed with what I would be posting, were I posting. Sure. So the first of those, number 15, designer love. I mean, we've talked at length about some of the designers that I love, but certainly at the moment I've got a lot of time and love for Joji Locatelli. I'm knitting her starting point at the moment. I've been looking at her Radiate pullover. There's a load of things that she's got going on, so really, really feeling a lot of love for Joji at the moment. 16, knitting PJ party. Now this is where I'll confess an Instagram post would have been more helpful, but do I have any knitting? I don't have any knitting specific PJs. I do love a bit of a schlumpy day, and in fact, hey, do you know what? This, in fairness, this cardigan is kind of used as a bit of a makeshift dressing gown sometimes, so I have been known to throw this on top of PJs and sit on my sofa and do a little bit of gentle knitting. So yeah, I'm going to call it. I'm going to say Campsite fits beautifully in with the knitting PJ party aesthetic. 17, Sunday fun day. I mean, today is Sunday. Today is the 17th, in fact, and I'd like to hope that we're all having fun. Right? You're having fun, right? Number 18, project bag. I talk about so many project bags over here, from ones that have been made by friends, from the fabulous bags that I showed as part of the Blame Dunderknit Along giveaway from Tane Casey. I'm looking at some of the ones over here behind. I have a couple of bags by Mrs. Brown's Bags, which I adore, which is Jodie from the Grocery Girls podcast. I have some Betsy Makes bags. Oh, Betsy Makes, who is a British bag designer, hand dyer, has just brought out a new design of bags that I have been lusting over. They are beautiful drawstring bags. They look really sturdy and stunning, and so yeah, I've got my eye on those, just so you know. 19 is library, and I will say I do have some kind of physical books. They're downstairs on my bookshelves around knitting generally, but more often than not, Ravelry is my library, and so I'll have a look through there. I'll scroll through patterns that I've bought in the past when it's perhaps been designers who've been having a sale, or something that I've been really excited about potentially knitting and wanting to find out a little bit more about it, and then just got distracted and waylaid. So my Ravelry library is the place to be, and I have quite a few patterns in there. I really need to spend some more time going through it and sorting it out, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, I will say. 20 is local yarn shop, and I am so lucky to benefit from having a fabulous one very nearby. So about a 30-minute bus ride away from me is Tribe Yarns. It is run by the fabulous individual that is Millie. Millie I've spoken about here a little bit at length. I also, if you want to see a little bit more of that yarn store in detail, you can pop back over to my Vlogmas videos. I believe it was around about day 7. I'll need to double check. I'll put it here on the screen to let you know which video in particular it is. But if you want to see Tribe Yarns for yourself and experience some of the woolly delights that Millie has in her shop, I would highly recommend that you do so. It's a shop based down in Richmond upon Thames, and while it is a little bit out of central London, it's on the tube, it's on the train. It is, I would say, a kind of lovely half day outside of the city. It's a beautiful part of the world. There's a lot to see and do there. There's Richmond Park, which is one of the most beautiful spots in London, and you won't regret it, trust me. Just don't go on a day when she's closed. That you might regret and blame me for, which isn't really my fault, but yeah, I get it. 21 is stash, just a peek. I mean, nailed it. 22 is indie dyer love, and I feel like I talk a lot about indie dyers in general, but what I'm going to do is, at the risk of unsettling you entirely, is just tip the camera back for a second. Ooh. And you'll be able to see that top shelf, and in particular these 4 cubbies here are full to the brim of indie dyed yarns. So whether it is Woolenvine, whether it's Stacy of Stress Knits, whether it is a little bit of Lush Knit and Megan, whether it is some Hedgehog, whether it's indie dyed sock yarn spun right round, I have a myriad of wonderful dyers in there as well. Let me bring you back down. Sorry if I made any of you queasy. Indie dyed yarn, I love so much of it. It's beautiful, and I'm delighted to support hand dyers because they do some fabulous work. They're incredibly creative and have colour palettes and kind of aesthetics to die for. No pun intended, but kind of intended. And yeah, I love them. 23 is colour work, and I've done a little bit of it over here in the podcast, whether it is some of the mitts that I've shown you, whether it is sweaters, obviously Jennifer Steingass and Caitlin Hunter are two very prominent colour workers. Obviously Ellie of Skeyndeer has a fabulous array of colour work mitts to choose from as well. There's a lot of fabulous colour work designers out there, and I'm delighted to knit some of their patterns. 24 is texture, and I love a bit of texture. In terms of patterns and designs that I've used in the past, I know that the And She Was sweater that I've shown in the past previously here, which is by Yelena Dasher, who is our moderator over on Ravelry, has that beautiful textured sort of broken rib front. Similarly, my fabulous friend Connie, who is Lemon Tangos on Instagram, has knit the Farmhouse cardigan, and that is such a beautiful textured cardigan. That, ooh, I need to have a think about my Georgetown and how that might go with the farmhouse. Ooh, come back to me on that. Thinking about it. But yeah, love a textured knit, particularly if it's just a kind of a broken rib or a seed stitch or a moss stitch. That, oh, makes my heart sing. Love it. 25 is Pinstagram, and I'm guessing the motivation behind this is the idea of using Instagram as if it were Pinterest, which is cross-pollinating the social medias there, and essentially using it as a means of inspiration. And hopefully you'll recognise that we do that quite a lot over here at Knitting Vicariously. And so whether it's the Knitting Vicariously hashtag, whether it's the Blame Dunderknit Along hashtag, there are a couple of hashtags associated with this channel that you can use to perhaps see and peruse what some other people are knitting vicariously or indeed otherwise. And I love using I love using Instagram, there we go, as a means of getting inspiration, and following hashtags is one of my favourite ways to do that. So yeah, always love a bit of Pinstagramming. Yes, doesn't roll off the tongue. 27 is favourite yarn, and honestly I am going to struggle to narrow it down. You can see my stash is full of a genuine array of different yarns. I know I love using MCNs for their softness. I love a superwash merino for its kind of multi-purpose or sort of versatility, if you like, but I also love using slightly woollier wools for all of those reasons. But on the basis that I have it to hand, and I have described it as being like holding kittens up to your face, I'm just, for now, it's this gold beauty. This is pretty special. So let's call it that for today. Now, the next 10 minutes or so. Yeah. And then 28, the final day, is hat selfie. Isn't that what like 90% of this podcast is? It's just me showing you myself in hats. I mean, case in point, Candy Dot, Yelena Dasher, coming very soon. Have a good one, Pickles.